people think losing a house happens at a courthouse with lawyers, judges, and stacks of paperwork. Mine happened between 10:41 a.m. and 12:18 p.m. I left for a routine heart checkup at Fort Sanders Regional Medical Center in Knoxville. When I came home, my key no longer worked. My daughter-in-law had changed the locks, moved my late wife's porch chair, and decided my house belonged to her now. The funny thing, her plan was already dead before she installed that lock. She just didn't know it yet. Before we get started, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you like real stories about family betrayal, resilience, and quiet revenge, consider subscribing. Grab a coffee, get comfortable, and stay with me here because this story gets a lot stranger before it gets better. Before I tell you how my daughter-in-law locked me out of my own house, I need you to understand something about me. I'm not the kind of man people notice, never have been. At 68 years old, I drove a silver 2008 Ford Ranger with a dent above the rear wheel that I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. I wore the same brown work boots until the soles practically begged for retirement. Most mornings you'd find me sitting in the corner booth at Pete's Diner on Kingston Pike in Knoxville, Tennessee, drinking coffee that was stronger than it had any right to be, and arguing about college football with my best friend. It was a quiet life, and honestly, I liked it that way. My name is Nash Simmons. I lived in the same house on Maple Hollow Road for almost 37 years. My wife Ruth and I bought that house in the spring of 1987. Back then, interest rates were high, money was tight, and the kitchen had avocado green wallpaper that should have been declared a crime against humanity. We loved it anyway. We painted every room ourselves. We planted the maple tree in the front yard when our son Caleb was 6 years old. We built the back deck one summer after watching exactly 2 home improvement videos and wildly overestimating our carpentry skills. The deck leaned slightly to the left for 20 years. Ruth used to call it the deck with character. I called it proof that I should never have been trusted with power tools. She laughed every single time, even after hearing the joke 100 times. That's the thing about Ruth. She was kind enough to pretend I was funnier than I actually was. I lost her 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Too fast. One day we were arguing over whether we needed new patio furniture. 3 months later I was sitting alone in a hospital room listening to machines that had suddenly become far too quiet. Life changes in strange ways after that. The house gets bigger, dinner gets quieter, you find yourself talking to photographs. Not because you've lost your mind, because silence becomes heavier than conversation. I managed. Most widowers do, not gracefully, but eventually. My routine became my anchor. Coffee at Pete's every morning at 7 o'clock, mowing the lawn every Thursday, watching old westerns on Friday nights, checking in on neighbors, helping at church when my knees cooperated, and spending as much time as possible with my grandson Ethan. Now, Ethan was 13 when all this happened. Good kid, smart kid, still believed people should do the right thing even when nobody was watching. That quality worried me sometimes. The world has a habit of testing people like that, but it also made me proud. Ethan could spend hours sitting on my back porch listening to stories about things most teenagers would consider painfully boring. Property records, old Knoxville history, funny courthouse mistakes. For reasons I never fully understood, he enjoyed all of it. Grandpa, he once asked me, how can a piece of paper decide who owns a house? That question made me smile. Because people need a way to remember promises, I told him. At the time, neither of us realized how important that answer would become. Now my son Caleb was a different story. Not a bad man, never a bad man, but some people spend their lives trying to avoid conflict. Caleb was one of those people. If 2 people argued in a room, Caleb's first instinct was to leave the room. If a decision needed to be made, Caleb preferred waiting. If a problem appeared, he hoped time would solve it. Sometimes it did. Most times, it didn't. Then there was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, 39 years old, sharp, organized, ambitious, the kind of person who never walked anywhere if she could charge toward it. When she first married Caleb, I liked her. I really did. She was energetic, confident, driven, things my son wasn't. They balanced each other. At least, that's what I thought. Then life got complicated. About a year before all this happened, Caleb and Vanessa ran into financial trouble. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic, just a series of bad decisions mixed with bad luck, a failed business investment, a rental property that became a money pit, credit card debt, unexpected repairs, the kind of problems that grow quietly until suddenly they're too large to ignore. One evening, Caleb called me. I remember because I was grilling hamburgers. It was 6:43 p.m. I looked at my phone and immediately knew something was wrong. Parents know those things. "Hey, Dad," he said, and the way he said it told me everything. 2 weeks later, Caleb, Vanessa, and Ethan moved into my house, temporarily. That's the word everyone used, temporarily. 3 months, maybe 6, just until they got back on their feet. I didn't hesitate, not because of Caleb, not even because of Vanessa, because of Ethan. I wasn't about to let my grandson bounce between apartments while his parents figured things out. So I cleaned out the guest rooms, made space in the garage, moved some old furniture around, and welcomed them home. For a while, things were good. Better than good, actually. The house felt alive again. There were conversations at dinner, shoes by the front door, laughter in the living room, the sound of someone raiding the refrigerator at midnight. I hadn't realized how much I missed those things. Even Ruth's old house seemed happier. You know that feeling when a place starts breathing again? That's what it felt like. Some evenings, Ethan and I sat on the back deck watching thunderstorms roll across East Tennessee while Vanessa cooked dinner inside. Other nights, Caleb helped me fix little things around the house. For the first few months, I genuinely believed we'd made the right decision. I thought we were becoming closer, stronger, more connected. And looking back now, I think part of me wanted to believe that so badly that I ignored the small warning signs, the little comments, the subtle changes, the things that seemed harmless at first. Because trouble rarely arrives screaming. Usually it walks through the front door smiling. And the first real sign of trouble came the day Vanessa stopped calling it my house. The first time Vanessa called it our house, I didn't think much about it. Honestly, I probably should have. It happened on a Tuesday evening around 6:15 p.m. I remember because Ethan and I had just come back from picking up barbecue sandwiches from Buddy's Bar BQ on Kingston Pike. We'd brought enough food for everyone, and the whole house smelled like smoked pork and sweet sauce. Vanessa was standing in the kitchen talking to one of her friends on speakerphone. I wasn't trying to listen. At my age, people assume you can't hear anything anyway. One of the few advantages of getting older. As Ethan carried drinks to the table, I heard Vanessa say casually, "We're thinking about repainting the living room in our house. Our house. Not Nash's house, not my father-in-law's house, our house." The phrase barely registered at first. It wasn't exactly a crime. People say things. Families share space. Maybe she just misspoke. So I ignored it, at least I tried to. But once you notice something, you start noticing it everywhere. A few days later, she said it again, then again, then again. Our property, our backyard, our garage, our plans for the house. Each comment was small enough to dismiss individually. Together, they started forming a pattern, and patterns were something I'd spent most of my life paying attention to. Not because I was suspicious, because details matter, especially when people think nobody is watching. Now I need you to understand something. Vanessa wasn't openly hostile. That would have been easier. Instead, she was polite, friendly, helpful, the kind of person who smiled while moving your furniture. One Saturday morning, I came home from Pete's Diner and discovered Ruth's old reading chair missing from the living room. I found it in the upstairs storage room, covered with boxes. When I asked about it, Vanessa smiled. Oh, I was just trying to modernize the room. Modernize. That chair had sat beside the fireplace for almost 20 years. Ruth used to read mystery novels there every evening. Sometimes she'd fall asleep with the book still open in her lap. I could still picture it. And now the chair had been relocated without anyone asking me. Again, not a major offense, just another tiny piece of a larger picture. The same thing happened with Ruth's curtains, then her coffee mugs, then several framed photographs. Nothing disappeared completely. Everything simply got moved, stored, reorganized, improved. Funny how improvement always seemed to involve removing traces of the people who came before. One evening I walked into the garage and couldn't find my toolbox. Now, if you've ever owned a toolbox for 30 years, you know exactly how personal that relationship becomes. Mine was a red Craftsman box with a broken handle and 3 drawers that stuck whenever humidity got high. I knew where every wrench lived, every screwdriver, every bolt, every spare part. It had survived 3 vehicles, 2 roof repairs, and 1 unfortunate lawnmower incident we will never discuss. The toolbox was gone. I eventually found it behind stacks of plastic storage bins Vanessa had purchased. When I asked why it had been moved, she looked genuinely confused. I was trying to create more functional storage. Functional. That's another word that started bothering me. Everything became functional. Everything became optimized. Everything became reorganized. The house I'd shared with Ruth for decades slowly began looking less like a home and more like a real estate listing. You know that look. Neutral colors, generic decorations, nothing personal, nothing rooted, nothing with history, just clean surfaces and future plans. Caleb noticed some of it. I know he did. But Caleb had a remarkable ability to avoid uncomfortable conversations. One night after dinner, I mentioned the missing toolbox. He stared at his mashed potatoes like they contained the answer to world peace. Then he said, "I'm sure she meant well." That became his favorite sentence. I'm sure she meant well. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. Either way, the toolbox was still hidden behind Christmas decorations. The person who surprised me most during that period was Ethan. Kids see things adults miss. One afternoon, he sat beside me on the back deck while I changed a fishing reel. We watched a storm building over the Tennessee hills. The sky had that dark blue color that means rain is coming. After several minutes of silence, Ethan asked, "Grandpa, does it bother you when Mom changes things?" Now that got my attention. I looked over. He was staring at the yard, not at me. Kids often do that when they're asking something important. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "She talks about the house like she's already lived here forever." I didn't answer right away because I wasn't sure what to say. Finally, I smiled. A house belongs to whoever takes care of it. That sounded wise at the time. Looking back, it was incomplete. A house also belongs to whoever legally owns it. But that lesson would come later. As summer turned into fall, Vanessa's language became more interesting. And by interesting, I mean concerning. One evening, she was sitting at the dining room table working on her laptop. I was reading the newspaper nearby. She probably forgot I was there, or maybe she assumed I wasn't paying attention. Either way, she was talking on the phone. I heard phrases that immediately stood out. Property transfer, estate planning, future ownership, family equity. Now those terms might sound harmless. Most people wouldn't think twice about them. I did. Because for 35 years, I worked around documents filled with language exactly like that. Words matter. Specific words matter even more. And people who don't understand those words often use them incorrectly. Vanessa was using them incorrectly. That was what caught my attention. For example, she'd casually mention transferring ownership as if it were changing a Netflix password. Real property doesn't work that way. Ownership isn't created by assumptions or feelings or expectations. It's created through very specific legal actions. The fact that Vanessa seemed confident without being accurate bothered me. Confidence without knowledge can be dangerous. particularly when money gets involved. Then another thing started happening. Friends would visit, neighbors would stop by, and Vanessa would tell stories. Small stories, harmless stories, except each version subtly changed reality. She talked about future renovations, future additions, future plans, as though those decisions already belonged to her, as though the house was simply waiting for paperwork to catch up. The most uncomfortable moment happened during a neighborhood barbecue. A woman named Sandra asked how long they'd been living with me. Before Caleb could answer, Vanessa smiled and said, "We'll probably be here permanently." Permanently. The word hung in the air. Sandra glanced at me. I smiled politely. Vanessa smiled confidently. Caleb stared at the grill, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not anger, not yet suspicion, real suspicion, because people reveal their intentions long before they reveal their plans, and Vanessa was revealing hers every single day. The problem was that nobody else seemed to notice, or maybe nobody wanted to. Then came the Sunday dinner that changed everything, the dinner where Vanessa finally stopped hinting, stopped suggesting, stopped implying, and asked directly for what she wanted. Looking back now, that meal was the moment the entire story truly began. And trust me, the question she asked over pot roast and sweet tea told me exactly where all of this was headed. The Sunday dinner happened on October 15th. I know the exact date because I wrote it down later. Some days deserve a place in your memory. Others deserve evidence. That Sunday started normally enough. Church in the morning. A quick stop at Food City on North Peters Road, then home to prepare dinner. Now, Sunday dinners had always been important in our family. Ruth started the tradition years earlier. No matter how busy life became, Sunday evenings belonged to family. After she passed away, I kept the tradition alive, partly because it honored her, partly because I wasn't ready to let go. That evening I made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, dinner rolls from a local bakery, nothing fancy, just the kind of meal that reminds you home still exists. The weather outside was cool. A steady Tennessee autumn rain tapped against the kitchen windows. The old brass light fixture above the dining table cast a warm yellow glow across the room. For a little while, everything felt normal, comfortable, safe. Ethan was talking about a science project. Caleb was discussing a problem at work. I was listening and enjoying myself. Then Vanessa set down her fork and smiled. Now, after enough years on this earth, you learn to recognize certain smiles. There's a smile people give when they're genuinely happy. There's a smile people give when they're nervous. And then there's the smile people wear when they've rehearsed a conversation in advance. Vanessa was wearing the third kind. "Nash," she said. Her voice was unusually sweet, immediately suspicious. Nobody suddenly becomes that polite unless they're selling something or asking for something. "What can I do for you?" I asked. She exchanged a glance with Caleb, a very quick glance, but I saw it. Then she leaned forward slightly. "We've been talking about the future." Whenever a sentence starts that way, trouble usually follows. I nodded. "The future's a large subject." She laughed, not because I was funny, because she wanted me relaxed. "We've been thinking about ways to make things easier for everyone." There it was again, everyone, a wonderfully vague word. I took a sip of iced tea. "Go on." She folded her hands together. "You know, estate planning, family security, making sure everything is organized." At that point, something inside my head quietly sat up and started paying attention, because those weren't normal dinner conversation topics. Not for most families, not unless somebody wanted something. Caleb looked down at his plate. Ethan looked confused. Vanessa kept smiling. Then she finally said it. "Have you ever considered adding Caleb to the deed?" The room became very quiet, not dramatically quiet, just enough. The kind of silence where everyone suddenly becomes interested in their food. Now here's the thing. A lot of people assume older folks become shocked by these moments. I wasn't shocked. I was interested. because once somebody asks a question like that, they're revealing far more than they realize. I put down my fork, looked at her, and smiled. That's a pretty specific thought. She laughed lightly. Oh, it's just planning ahead. Planning ahead. Interesting. What kind of planning? I asked. She seemed encouraged, like she thought the conversation was going well. You know, making sure the house stays in the family. I nodded slowly. The house is already in the family. For a split second, I saw irritation flash across her face. Then it disappeared. She recovered quickly. I mean, legally. There it was, the real subject. Not family, not security, ownership. I glanced toward Caleb. My son suddenly found his mashed potatoes fascinating. If there had been a world championship for avoiding eye contact, Caleb would have won gold. I decided to make things a little uncomfortable. Sometimes the truth shows itself faster that way. Vanessa, I said, are you asking if I plan to give Caleb ownership of the house? Her smile tightened. Not give, just share. Share, another interesting word. People love using softer words when discussing expensive things. I leaned back in my chair. Then I delivered the first joke that came into my head. Well, if we're sharing ownership, I should probably get partial ownership of your SUV first. Ethan laughed. I laughed. Even Caleb chuckled. Vanessa didn't. That told me everything, because people who are joking laugh. People pursuing an agenda usually don't. The conversation stumbled forward awkwardly after that. Vanessa made a few more comments about planning. I made a few more jokes. Eventually, dinner ended. On the surface, nothing dramatic had happened, but inside my head, several alarms were ringing. You see, I spent 35 years working around property records. Most people hear the word deed and think it's a piece of paper. That's like calling an airplane a chair with wings. Technically not wrong, but missing most of the important details. Property ownership creates power, control, rights, responsibilities. And people rarely ask about deeds unless they've been thinking about them for a while. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table Ruth and I had purchased from a furniture store in 1994. The same table where Caleb had done homework. Birthday cakes had been cut. Arguments had happened. Apologies had happened. Life had happened. I sat there for almost an hour thinking. Then I did something that would later become very important. I started paying closer attention. Over the next several days, I noticed things I might have missed before. Vanessa spent more time on her laptop, more phone calls, more conversations that abruptly ended when I entered the room. Nothing obvious, nothing concrete, just enough to keep my instincts awake. Then came breakfast with Wade Parker. Now Wade had been my best friend since 1982. He'd spent 40 years delivering mail and another 10 years collecting opinions, most of them unsolicited. We met every Wednesday morning at Pete's Diner. Same booth, same waitress, same coffee. I told him about the dinner conversation. Wade listened carefully, then took a long drink of coffee. Finally, he said, "Nash, you ever watch raccoons?" I blinked. What, raccoons? I stared at him. No. He nodded seriously. Well, I have. That wasn't surprising. Wade had stories about everything. Raccoons don't grab one shiny thing. They keep checking every shiny thing until they find the easiest one to steal. I laughed. What exactly are you saying? He pointed his fork at me. I'm saying Vanessa isn't looking at the house. He paused. She's looking at ownership. I sat quietly, because deep down I suspected he was right. Then Wade added, and before you ask, yes, that's the weirdest analogy I've ever made. That earned another laugh. But the truth remained. Something was changing. I could feel it. The problem was that I still didn't know how far Vanessa was willing to go, or how long she'd been thinking about it. Then about 2 weeks later I got my answer, because Vanessa stopped pretending this was just an innocent conversation. And the moment she stopped asking politely was the moment I started preparing, Not for an argument, for something much bigger. After that Sunday dinner, I stopped treating Vanessa's comments like harmless family chatter. I started treating them like clues, not because I thought she was plotting some grand criminal conspiracy. Life usually isn't that dramatic. Most family disasters begin with small acts of entitlement that slowly grow larger. A person convinces themselves they deserve something. Then they convince themselves they're eventually going to get it. Then they convince themselves they practically already own it. That's the dangerous stage. Because once somebody starts believing that reality becomes an inconvenience. For the next couple of weeks, I kept my eyes open. And what I saw didn't make me feel any better. Vanessa became unusually interested in paperwork. Not her paperwork, mine. One afternoon, she casually asked where I kept my property tax records. Another day, she asked if I'd ever updated my will. Then there was the morning she wanted to know where I stored important house documents. She asked these questions the way people ask about the weather, very casually, very carefully, as though she had practiced sounding casual. Now I answered politely, mostly because I wanted to hear what came next. People reveal more when they think you're unsuspecting. The funny part was that Vanessa viewed me as a harmless old retiree, a man who drank too much coffee and watched too many westerns. A man whose biggest daily challenge was deciding whether to mow the lawn before lunch or after. She had no idea what I used to do for a living. Not really. She knew I'd worked for Knox County. That was it. She never cared enough to ask for details, and I never volunteered them. Sometimes information is more useful when people underestimate it. Stay with me here. That matters later. About 10 days after the Sunday dinner, I received a reminder call from my cardiologist's office. Routine appointment, nothing serious. Just one of the many exciting privileges that come with collecting senior discounts. The appointment was scheduled for Thursday morning at Fort Sanders Regional Medical Center, October 26th. Check-in time, 9:45 a.m. I mentioned it during breakfast. Vanessa immediately looked interested. Too interested. You know that look. Not concern, calculation. How long do those appointments usually take? She asked. I shrugged. Depends. An hour, maybe. 2, could be. She nodded thoughtfully, then changed the subject. That should have been the end of it. But over the next few days, she asked similar questions several more times. What time would I leave? Would I be driving myself? Would I stop anywhere afterward? Would I need prescriptions filled? Each question seemed harmless. Together they felt like someone trying to build a schedule. By Tuesday, my instincts were officially awake. By Wednesday, they were screaming. That Wednesday morning, I met Wade at Pete's Diner. The place was busy. Country music played softly through old ceiling speakers. The smell of bacon filled the room. Wade arrived wearing the same faded University of Tennessee cap he'd owned since approximately the Civil War. At least that's how old it looked. I told him everything, the questions, the sudden interest, the timing. He listened quietly. Then he took a bite of toast, chewed, swallowed, and said, "If somebody keeps asking when you're leaving the house, they probably aren't planning a surprise birthday party." That earned a laugh. Then his expression became serious. "What are you thinking?" I stared out the diner window. "I'm thinking she's preparing for something." Wade nodded slowly. "What kind of something?" That was the problem. I didn't know, not yet. But I knew one thing. If something happened, I wanted to be ready. That afternoon, I made a decision. A very simple decision. I gathered every important document related to the house, the original deed, property tax records, insurance paperwork, mortgage payoff confirmation, copies of county records, even a handwritten note Ruth had left years earlier regarding household finances. I placed everything into an old blue document folder, the same blue folder mentioned at the beginning of this story. Nothing fancy, just faded cardboard and worn edges. But inside sat nearly 4 decades of proof. Proof of ownership, Proof of payments, proof of history, proof of reality. Then I placed the folder inside a locked compartment in my Ford Ranger, not inside the house, inside the truck. Something told me that mattered. The night before the appointment, Ethan knocked on my bedroom door. "Grandpa, come in." He stepped inside carrying a science textbook. He looked nervous. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." He hesitated, then finally said, "Are Mom and Dad okay?" That question hit harder than he realized, because children usually know something is wrong long before adults admit it. I set aside my book. "What makes you ask?" He shrugged. "They argue when they think nobody can hear." I nodded slowly. And Mom talks about money all the time." I could hear genuine worry in his voice. I hated that. Kids shouldn't have to carry adult stress. I put a hand on his shoulder. "They'll figure it out." That wasn't entirely true, but it was the best answer I had. Then he smiled slightly. "You always say that." "Because it's usually true." Usually, not always. The next morning arrived cold and gray. I woke at 6:12 a.m., made coffee, fed the birds, watched the sunrise through the kitchen window. The house felt strangely tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. At 8:30 a.m., Vanessa appeared unusually cheerful. That immediately concerned me. She offered to make breakfast, asked if I needed anything, asked if I wanted her to drive me, asked if I was feeling okay. It was the most helpful she'd been in months, which was exactly why I didn't trust it. People reveal themselves through patterns. Sudden changes deserve attention. By 9:05 a.m., I was heading toward the hospital. Before leaving, I quietly checked that the blue folder remained secured inside the truck. Then I sent Wade a text message. The message read, "If anything strange happens today, remind me that I'm too old to commit felony-level stupidity." A minute later, he replied, "Agreed, misdemeanor-level stupidity only." That made me laugh. Good friends are valuable, especially on days when your instincts refuse to relax. At 9:43 a.m., I checked into Fort Sanders. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and coffee, not a pleasant combination. A nurse eventually called my name. I followed her down a hallway for routine testing. Blood pressure, heart monitoring, the usual collection of aging-related adventures. At 10:42 a.m., while a technician was attaching monitoring leads to my chest, something happened across town. I didn't know it yet. I wouldn't learn about it for another hour and a half. But at 10:42 a.m., Vanessa Simmons made the first mistake that would eventually destroy her entire plan. And when I finally drove home that afternoon, I was about to discover exactly how far her greed had taken her. I left Fort Sanders Regional Medical Center at 11:47 a.m. The appointment had gone fine. Nothing exciting, no dramatic diagnosis, no urgent warnings, just the usual advice doctors give men my age. Eat healthier, exercise more, get better sleep. Advice I intended to follow immediately after finishing the cheeseburger I was already planning to buy for lunch. I stopped at a small drive-thru on Kingston Pike and grabbed a burger, fries, and a sweet tea. Then I headed home. The drive should have taken about 20 minutes. Instead, it became one of those drives you remember for the rest of your life. At 12:18 p.m., I turned onto Maple Hollow Road. The neighborhood looked normal. Mailboxes, lawns, children riding bicycles, nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then I pulled into my driveway and immediately felt something was wrong, not because of the house, because of the front porch. The wooden rocking chair that had belonged to Ruth was missing. Now that might sound insignificant, but when you've lived somewhere for nearly 4 decades, you notice changes instantly. That chair had sat in the same spot for years. Every morning, Ruth drank coffee there. Every evening, she watched the sunset there. After she passed, I left it exactly where it was. Not because I was stuck in the past, because some things deserve to stay where they belong. Yet now, it was gone. I parked the truck, turned off the engine, sat quietly for a moment. The feeling in my stomach got worse. Then I climbed out and walked toward the front door. That's when I saw it. The lock. The old brass deadbolt was gone. In its place sat a brand new black electronic keypad, a shiny one, expensive looking, installed professionally. For several seconds I simply stared at it. My first thought wasn't anger. My first thought was confusion, because surely there had to be an explanation. Maybe the old lock broke. Maybe someone had installed a replacement. Maybe... Then I noticed my key no longer fit. Not poorly, not awkwardly, not at all. Wrong lock, wrong system, wrong everything. I stood there holding the useless key. The realization arrived slowly. Then, all at once, someone had changed the locks on my house without telling me. I looked toward the front window. The curtains moved. Someone was watching. My heartbeat remained surprisingly calm. That might sound strange, but panic rarely helps. Years ago, working around property disputes taught me something valuable. The calmer person usually sees more. So instead of pounding on the door, I took a slow breath. Then I noticed something else. The front porch camera, or rather the lack of a functioning front porch camera. A strip of blue painter's tape had been placed directly over the lens. Not carefully, not professionally, just stuck over the camera. Like someone suddenly remembered surveillance existed. I actually laughed, not because anything was funny, because it was such a ridiculous mistake. If you're trying to hide what you're doing covering the camera after you've already walked in front of it isn't exactly master-level planning. Stay with me here, that detail matters later. I pressed the doorbell. A few seconds passed. Nothing. I rang it again. This time I heard movement inside, footsteps, voices, then silence. Then more footsteps. Finally the door opened. Vanessa stood there, but only partially. She kept one hand on the door, the way people do when they don't intend to let you enter. That told me everything. Behind her I could see part of the living room. Boxes, furniture moved, things rearranged. "Nash," she said. Her voice sounded rehearsed, prepared, like she'd been practicing. I looked at her, then at the new lock, then back at her. Interesting door. A flash of irritation crossed her face. Not the reaction she'd expected. She was expecting anger, confusion, maybe even begging. Instead, she got curiosity. That seemed to annoy her. "We needed to make some changes." I nodded. "Apparently." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the obvious question. "Why can't my key open my front door?" She straightened slightly, as though she'd finally reached the part of the speech she'd prepared. "Nash, we've been talking about your future." There it was again, that phrase, your future, the phrase people use when discussing somebody else's life. I remained silent. She continued, "We think it's time to start considering assisted living options." I blinked. Once, that's all, not because I was shocked, because I was trying to decide whether she'd actually said those words. "You think what?" She folded her arms. "We've discussed this." "No," I said calmly, "we haven't." That seemed to throw her off. Only slightly, but enough. Then I saw Caleb standing in the hallway behind her. My son looked miserable, not angry, not confident, miserable. His eyes refused to meet mine. That was almost worse, because guilty people often avoid eye contact. "Nash," Vanessa continued, "this house isn't practical for you anymore." I glanced toward Caleb. Nothing, no objection, no support, no explanation, just silence. That hurt more than I expected. Then another face appeared behind them. Ethan, my grandson. The moment he saw me standing outside, his expression changed. Confusion, fear, embarrassment. The poor kid looked like he wanted to disappear. That told me something important. He hadn't known this was happening. Children are terrible liars. Thankfully. "Grandpa," he said quietly. Vanessa immediately stepped sideways, partially blocking him from view. That movement made my jaw tighten. Still, I remained calm, very calm. Because the more Vanessa talked, the more information she gave away. And information is valuable, especially when someone believes they've already won. "We've been preparing for this transition," she said. "Preparing for what? For the next stage." I actually laughed, a short laugh, an exhausted laugh. The next stage sounds like a retirement community brochure. She didn't appreciate the joke. You're being difficult. Now that was interesting, because being locked out of your own house apparently qualified as being difficult. I glanced again at the lock, then at the tape over the camera, then at the partially open door, then at my son, then at Vanessa. And suddenly everything became very clear. Not legally, emotionally. Vanessa genuinely believed she was in control. She genuinely believed changing the lock created authority. She genuinely believed possession was the same thing as ownership. And that misunderstanding was about to become very expensive for her. I looked directly into her eyes, then asked the question that changed the entire conversation. One simple question. Calm, quiet, almost conversational. Vanessa. She lifted her chin. Yes. Who told you my name wasn't on the deed anymore? The confidence vanished from her face. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see it. And that was the moment I knew something important. Vanessa had expected resistance. She had not expected knowledge. Unfortunately for her, greedy people hate silence. And what she said next would become the biggest mistake of her entire plan. The moment I asked about the deed, Vanessa's confidence cracked. Not completely, just enough. Like a windshield after the first stone hits it. You don't see the full damage yet, but it's there. For a second she simply stared at me. Then she recovered, or at least she thought she did. We've been discussing legal options, she said. That answer told me absolutely nothing, which usually means it tells you everything. I nodded slowly. Legal options with whom? She hesitated. Tiny pause. Less than a second, still enough. Professionals. Professionals. Another wonderfully vague word. I almost smiled. Because people who actually speak with professionals usually know their names. Lawyers have names. Real estate agents have names. Title specialists have names. Imaginary experts tend to be called professionals. I glanced past her again. Caleb still looked miserable. Ethan looked terrified. The poor kid was standing halfway down the hallway holding a backpack, like he wasn't sure whether he should leave, stay, or disappear into another dimension. Honestly, I understood the feeling. Then Vanessa did something unexpected. She stepped away from the door, not enough to let me inside, just enough to reach a folder sitting on a nearby table. When she returned, she held it like a lawyer revealing evidence in a courtroom drama. You know that look, the one that says, "Now you'll understand how clever I am." Unfortunately for her, I had spent decades around actual paperwork, which meant I knew the difference between documents and decorations. She opened the folder. Inside were several printed pages, some highlighted, some clipped together, all organized. Very impressive, at least visually. "Nash," she said, "we've done a lot of research." Research, one of the most dangerous words in America. Half the country's problems begin with somebody doing research online at 2 o'clock in the morning. She pulled out a document, a quitclaim deed form, blank, unsigned, unrecorded, incomplete. I recognized it instantly. She held it up proudly, as though she had discovered buried treasure. "This is how property transfers happen." I looked at the form, then at her, then back at the form. Eventually, I said, "What does that mean?" "It means that's a blank form." Her jaw tightened. I continued, "A blank check isn't money. A blank deed isn't ownership." For the first time, irritation became visible. Vanessa wasn't used to being challenged, particularly by someone she'd already decided was obsolete. Then she produced another document, a typed care plan, several pages long. According to the document, I supposedly needed assistance managing my affairs. There were recommendations, suggestions, future housing considerations, lots of official-sounding language. No signatures, no medical findings, no legal authority, just opinions wearing a necktie. I flipped through the pages, then handed them back. "This is interesting fiction." That comment nearly caused an explosion. "Nash, you're not taking this seriously." "Oh, I am." I pointed toward the front door. The new lock convinced me. At that moment, Caleb finally spoke, barely. "Maybe we should all calm down." Now there was my son, always arriving exactly 3 hours after the fire started. Vanessa spun toward him. We are calm. Nobody in the history of civilization has ever improved a situation by announcing they are calm. The moment someone says it, the opposite is usually true. Then she looked back at me and made another mistake, a bigger one. If necessary, we'll call the police. I actually laughed, not politely, not quietly, a genuine laugh, the kind that surprises even you. Because the statement was so ridiculous, Vanessa didn't appreciate my reaction. What exactly is funny? I took a breath, then answered honestly. The part where you lock the homeowner out of his own house and threaten to call the police. Her face turned red, not dramatically, just enough. Then came the sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway. I didn't need to look. I already knew who it was. A few moments later, Wade Parker stepped out of his old white Chevrolet pickup, carrying 2 large coffees, one in each hand. Naturally, because Wade believed every emergency could be improved through caffeine. Sometimes he was right. He walked toward the porch, took one look at the new lock, looked at me, looked at Vanessa, then said, "Well," pause. "Looks like I missed the beginning." I almost choked, trying not to laugh. Vanessa definitely didn't laugh. Wade handed me a coffee. "Thought you might need this." "I do." Then he studied the painter's tape covering the camera. "That's not suspicious at all." I pointed toward it. "Apparently it's modern home security." Wade nodded seriously. "Ah, the hide the evidence package." That earned a small smile from Ethan. The first smile I'd seen from him all day. Good, the kid needed one. Now here's where things became important, because Wade wasn't just a friend, he was also a witness. And witnesses change conversations. Vanessa seemed to realize that. Her tone shifted, not softer, sharper, more defensive. "We're trying to protect Nash." Wade blinked. "By locking him outside, we had no choice. No choice." Pay attention to that phrase, because people reveal themselves through the words they choose. No choice implies necessity, urgency, pressure, circumstances beyond control. The problem was that none of those things existed. Then came the moment everything changed. The moment Vanessa made the mistake that ultimately destroyed her position. It happened because she was angry, because greed and pride were beginning to outweigh caution, because she wanted to win more than she wanted to think. She crossed her arms, looked directly at me, and said, "We couldn't risk you changing your mind." Silence. Real silence. Even the birds seemed to stop making noise. I stared at her. Wade stared at her. Caleb stared at the ground. Then I asked, very carefully, changing my mind about what? The moment the question left my mouth, Vanessa realized what she'd done. Too late. Way too late. "We discussed transferring ownership." "No," I said quietly. "You asked about it." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. So I continued. "You changed the locks before any transfer occurred." Silence. "You changed the locks before any deed existed." More silence. "You changed the locks while I was at a medical appointment." The silence got heavier, because now Wade had heard it. Caleb had heard it. Ethan had heard it. And most importantly, Vanessa had admitted it herself. Nobody tricked her. Nobody pressured her. Nobody forced her. She volunteered the information. That's the funny thing about arrogance. People become so focused on proving they're right that they accidentally confess. I took a slow sip of coffee, then another. Finally, I said, "Thank you." That confused everyone, even Wade. Vanessa frowned. "For what?" I looked directly at her. "For explaining the timeline." Her expression changed immediately. The confidence was gone now, not entirely, but enough. Enough to matter, because for the first time all day, Vanessa realized something terrifying. She didn't actually understand the game she was playing, and she definitely didn't understand the person she was playing it against. Now pay attention to this next part. because this was where 35 years spent reading deeds, property transfers, title records, and ownership disputes finally became useful. And Vanessa was about to learn that changing a lock and owning a house were two very different things. People often imagine revenge as something dramatic. Shouting, threats, slamming doors, courtroom speeches, that's television. Real life is usually much quieter. Sometimes revenge is simply letting someone continue talking until they reveal how little they actually understand. That afternoon, standing on my own front porch with a cup of coffee in one hand and a locked front door in front of me, I realized something important. Vanessa thought she had information. I had knowledge. Those are not the same thing. Information is finding a blank deed form online. Knowledge is understanding what makes that form matter or not matter, and trust me, the difference is expensive. The silence after Vanessa's accidental confession stretched for several seconds. Wade stood beside me. Caleb stood inside the doorway. Ethan hovered nervously in the hallway. Vanessa crossed her arms and tried to rebuild her confidence. Unfortunately for her, confidence built on misunderstanding doesn't survive contact with reality for very long. I took another sip of coffee, then set the cup down on the porch railing. "Vanessa," I said calmly, "how much do you know about deeds?" She immediately lifted her chin. That answer alone told me she believed she knew plenty. "Enough," I nodded. No offense, but that's usually the answer people give right before proving they don't. Her eyes narrowed. I continued before she could interrupt. "Let's start simple." Then I pointed toward the stack of documents she had shown me earlier. "A blank deed isn't ownership." No response. "A signed deed isn't necessarily ownership." Still no response. "Even a notarized deed isn't automatically ownership." Now she looked confused. Good. Confusion is often the first step toward learning, or in Vanessa's case, panic. Wade leaned against a porch column, clearly enjoying himself. I could practically hear him thinking, "Go on, Nash. Teach the class." So I did. "Real property transfers require specific elements," I said. "Grantor, grantee, proper legal description, intent, delivery, acceptance." Vanessa blinked. Caleb looked completely lost. Ethan looked fascinated. Honestly, he was probably the only person there genuinely learning something. Then I added, "And that's before we even discuss recording." Now Vanessa interrupted, "We know about recording." I smiled. That smile bothered her because it wasn't angry, it wasn't emotional, it was the smile of somebody who knew exactly where the conversation was going. "No," I said gently. "You know the word." That hit harder than I intended. For a moment, nobody spoke. The breeze moved through the maple tree in the front yard. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Life continued. Meanwhile, Vanessa's entire understanding of the situation was beginning to collapse. Then I finally revealed something I had intentionally kept hidden. My entire career was property records. Silence. Vanessa stared. Caleb stared. Even Wade grinned, because he'd been waiting for that moment. I continued. 35 years. Now their expressions changed. All of them. Even Caleb. Especially Caleb. Because suddenly dozens of past conversations made sense. All those times I'd casually corrected legal terminology. All those stories about county records. All those comments about title disputes. None of them had paid attention. Why would they? I was just Dad, just Grandpa, just the old guy drinking coffee on the porch. Vanessa spoke first. "You worked with paperwork." That almost made me laugh. Worked with paperwork. That's like saying a surgeon works with knives. Technically true, spectacularly incomplete. "I reviewed transfers." I paused. "Thousands of them." Another pause. "I trained people who reviewed transfers." One more. "I spent decades identifying mistakes exactly like the ones you're making." Now the silence felt different, heavier. The confidence was draining from Vanessa's face. Slowly, but steadily. You know that look. The moment someone realizes they may have underestimated the wrong person. Then I asked a simple question. Who advised you to change the locks? Nothing. Was it a lawyer? Nothing. A title company? Nothing. A county official? Nothing. Finally, she answered, "We researched it ourselves." There it was, the most expensive phrase in modern America. We researched it ourselves. Translation. Nobody qualified told us this was a good idea. Wade coughed suspiciously into his coffee cup. I knew he was hiding a laugh. Then I looked toward Caleb. My son still hadn't said much. That bothered me. Not because I expected him to defend me, because I expected him to tell the truth. Caleb. His head lifted. Did you think this was legal? He swallowed, looked at Vanessa, then at me, then back at the floor. Finally, he answered, I didn't know exactly what was happening. That wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no, it was a Caleb answer, the kind designed to survive any outcome. Part of me felt angry, part of me felt sad. Mostly I felt tired. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan stepped forward, not much, just a few feet, but enough. "Mom," he said quietly. The entire group turned toward him. Grandpa owns the house. Simple, direct, honest. Children have a remarkable ability to remove unnecessary complexity. Vanessa immediately stiffened. Ethan, stay out of this. The boy looked down, and that made me angry. Not explosive anger, the dangerous kind, the quiet kind, because none of this should have involved him. He was 13. He should have been worrying about homework and baseball, not property disputes. I took a breath, then made a decision. I was going to give Vanessa one final opportunity. One. Not because she deserved it, because I wanted Ethan to see it. I wanted my grandson to witness the difference between revenge and fairness. So I looked directly at Vanessa, then spoke very clearly. Unlock the door. No response. Return access to the property. Silence. We can sit down tonight and discuss everything like adults. Still silence. I nodded. That's your easiest option. Now pride entered the conversation. You could see it happen. The moment where reason stepped aside and ego took over. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. No. One word, that's all. But it changed everything. Because up until that moment, this situation could still have ended peacefully, embarrassingly, awkwardly, but peacefully. The second she said no, it became something else. A conflict, a documented conflict, a legally significant conflict. And the truly fascinating part, she still believed she was winning. I looked at Wade. Wade looked at me. We didn't need words. 30 years of friendship eliminates that requirement. Then I picked up my coffee, walked toward my truck, opened the driver's door, and paused. Before getting inside, I looked back at Vanessa one final time. You know what's funny? She didn't answer. Pride always introduces itself as strength. I pointed toward the new lock, but most of the time it's just stupidity wearing church shoes. For the first time all day, I saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. Good. Because uncertainty meant reality was finally arriving. I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove away. Not because I was defeated, not because I was retreating, quite the opposite. For the first time since arriving home, I knew exactly what needed to happen next. And by the time I finished gathering records, certified documents, and a few very important witnesses, Vanessa Simmons was going to learn a painful lesson. Changing a lock is easy. Proving ownership is something else entirely. I didn't drive far, just far enough to think. There's a difference. People imagine strategic moments happening in our fancy offices or courtrooms. Mine happened in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel off Interstate 40. I parked my Ford Ranger beneath a maple tree, turned off the engine, and sat there staring through the windshield. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to feel the hurt. Not the anger, the hurt. Because let's be honest, the lock wasn't what bothered me. The lock was metal. Metal doesn't betray you, people do. What hurt was seeing my son standing behind that door and saying almost nothing. What hurt was watching Ethan caught in the middle. What hurt was realizing that while I'd been treating them like family, somebody inside that house had started treating me like an obstacle. I sat quietly for several minutes. Then my phone rang. Wade. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I've had better Thursdays." "Fair." I could hear his truck engine running in the background. Then his voice changed, more serious. "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the blue folder sitting beside me. The same folder I'd placed in the truck before leaving for the doctor. The same folder Vanessa didn't know existed. The same thing I always did, which is document everything. Wade laughed. Good Lord, you really were born to work in property records." "Probably." Then I started the engine, because I knew exactly where I needed to go next. The Knox County Register of Deeds. The building sat downtown, not far from places I'd spent decades visiting during my career. Walking inside felt strangely familiar. The smell hadn't changed. Old paper, printer toner, coffee. Government buildings have their own scent, like history mixed with mild disappointment. The young woman behind the counter greeted me politely. I didn't know her, which made sense. Most of the people I worked with had retired years earlier. Still, I recognized the process, the system, the procedures. Some things never change. Within minutes, I requested certified copies of the property records associated with my house. Official ownership records, transfer history, recording history, everything. The employee processed the request efficiently. About 20 minutes later, I held fresh, certified documents in my hands, documents carrying the county seal, documents carrying legal authority, documents carrying facts. And facts are difficult things to argue with. The records showed exactly what I already knew. The property belonged to Nash Simmons, only Nash Simmons. No transfer, no shared ownership, no pending filing, no recorded change, nothing. Exactly as expected. Still, I wanted the certified copies, because evidence matters, particularly when somebody is building a fantasy around wishful thinking. Then I made my second stop, a place even more important, the office of Grace Holloway. Now Grace was 63 years old and had spent decades practicing real estate law in Knoxville. We'd crossed paths many times during our careers. Smart woman, direct woman, the kind of attorney who could dismantle a bad argument before finishing her coffee. She greeted me with obvious surprise. "Nash Simmons." I smiled. "Grace, please tell me you aren't here because you finally got arrested. I've made it 68 years. There's still time." That earned a laugh. Then I explained everything. The lock, the door, the statements, the attempted pressure, the blank deed, the camera, the conversation. Grace listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Then she asked a single question. Did she actually admit changing the lock before any transfer occurred? Yes. With witnesses present, yes, she nodded. Good. That single word felt surprisingly satisfying. Good. Not terrible, not complicated, good. Because for the first time all day, somebody else was looking at the situation through the same lens I was. Facts, evidence, reality. Then Grace smiled. Not a happy smile, the smile of a professional who had just spotted a serious mistake. Greedy people always rush. I immediately thought of Vanessa. That fit perfectly. Grace continued. If she'd been patient, this could have become more complicated. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Absolutely. Then she tapped the desk. But she wasn't patient. That was the heart of it. Vanessa wanted results immediately. She wanted ownership before ownership existed, control before authority existed, victory before the game had ended, and impatience creates evidence. Lots of evidence. Speaking of evidence, it started arriving faster than I expected. Around 4:30 that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. The first message read, "Dad, can we talk? Interesting." The second message arrived moments later. Things got out of hand. That one was even more interesting. Notice what it didn't say. It didn't say, nothing happened. It didn't say, you were mistaken. It didn't say, Vanessa was right. Instead, it said, things got out of hand, which implied responsibility. Then another message appeared, this one from Vanessa. Far longer, far more emotional. According to Vanessa, she was only trying to protect the family, only trying to secure stability, only trying to help. Funny how people become very philosophical once evidence begins collecting against them. I saved every message, every single one, then forwarded copies to Grace. Not because I was trying to build a case, because I already knew one existed. I simply wanted everything preserved. That evening brought another surprise, a voicemail, a very important voicemail, not from Caleb, not from Vanessa, from a mortgage consultant. Apparently, Vanessa had contacted a lending office earlier that week. Apparently, she had asked questions regarding property equity options. Apparently, she had discussed future ownership scenarios. Apparently, she had left enough information behind to create a paper trail. Now, to be clear, she hadn't successfully borrowed anything. She couldn't. She wasn't the owner. But the consultation itself mattered because it revealed intent. The more Vanessa reached for shortcuts, the more evidence she created. I need you to understand something. At that point, I wasn't excited. I wasn't celebrating. Honestly, I felt sad. Because every new document confirmed the same reality. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't poor communication. Vanessa had genuinely convinced herself that my house was already hers. And somewhere along the way, Caleb had failed to stop it. That realization hurt, more than I expected. Around sunset, Wade met me outside a small coffee shop near Market Square. We sat outside beneath string lights while people walked past. I handed him copies of the certified records. He studied them dramatically, as though reading classified government secrets. Then he nodded. Yep. Yep, what? Looks like you still own your house. I laughed. That's your legal opinion. Absolutely. Then he folded the papers. You know what's funny? What? The lock probably cost more than good judgment. That one stayed with me, because it was true. Vanessa had invested in appearances, not reality, and reality was catching up, fast. As darkness settled over Knoxville, Grace called with a final recommendation. A meeting, one meeting, at the house. Everyone present, all documents on the table, no more assumptions, no more stories, no more manipulation. Just facts. The confrontation would happen the next evening. And despite everything that had already occurred, the true climax of this story hadn't happened yet. Not at the courthouse, not at the lawyer's office, not on the front porch. It would happen beneath Ruth's old brass dining room light, at the same table where our family had shared thousands of meals. And before that meeting ended, somebody was going to learn the difference between possessing a house and owning one. The kitchen table had always been the center of my home, not the living room, not the front porch, the kitchen table. Ruth used to say that truth shows up easier over shared food. She was right. That night, however, nobody touched the pot roast I had reheated, out of habit more than hunger. The same brass light fixture above the table cast a warm glow, but it didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like a spotlight. Everyone arrived at 6:40 p.m. Grace Holloway came first, carrying a leather folder and the kind of expression that tells you she had already won the argument, you just hadn't heard it yet. Wade followed, holding 2 coffees like always. One for him, one for me. He set mine down gently, then leaned back in his chair like he was attending a show he had already paid for. Then came Caleb and Vanessa. Caleb wouldn't look at me. Vanessa looked everywhere except at the table. And finally, Ethan walked in last, hesitating at the doorway, like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to exist in this moment. That alone told me everything about how far this had gone off track. I waited until everyone sat down, then I spoke. No raising my voice, no drama, just clarity. We're going to keep this simple. Vanessa crossed her arms. Grace opened her folder. Wade sipped his coffee. Caleb looked like he wanted to disappear into the wooden chair. I placed the blue folder on the table. That alone changed the atmosphere. Vanessa noticed it immediately. "So that's what this is about," she said, trying to sound confident. I nodded. "This is about facts." Grace slid the first document forward. "The recorded deed for Maple Hollow Road property," she said calmly. "Filed, certified, and verified by Knox County." Vanessa didn't even look at it for long. "I've already seen paperwork," she replied. "That doesn't change what's been agreed." That word again, agreed. Grace didn't react. She just placed the second document down. "This is the chain of title. No transfers, no additions, no changes of ownership," Wade muttered under his breath. Shocking development. Caleb flinched slightly. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Then I did something I hadn't done all day. I spoke directly to her without humor. "Vanessa, I said you changed my locks based on a belief that you owned this house." She immediately responded. "We were protecting." "No," I interrupted gently. "You were assuming." Silence dropped hard across the table. Even the clock on the wall seemed louder. Grace placed her phone on the table and pressed play. A voicemail filled the room, a mortgage consultant's voice. Clear, professional. "Mrs. Simmons discussed potential equity options based on anticipated ownership transfer." Vanessa's head snapped up. "That was just an inquiry," she said quickly. Grace nodded. "Correct." And it created a record. That word mattered. Record. Because records don't care about intention, only actions. Wade leaned forward slightly. "I've got a question," he said. Vanessa looked at him sharply. He continued. "When exactly did you think you owned the house?" "I never said." "You changed the lock," Wade said simply. "That usually comes after ownership, not before." That landed harder than anything I had said all day. Caleb finally spoke, quietly. "We shouldn't have done that. We, not she, not you, we." Vanessa turned toward him, silent. "Caleb." But he shook his head. "I didn't know you were doing all of this. A crack, small but real." Then Ethan spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Why couldn't Grandpa just come inside?" That question hit the room differently, because it wasn't legal, it wasn't strategic, it was human. Vanessa hesitated. For the first time all day, she didn't have an immediate answer. "I took the opportunity." "Ethan," I said gently, "I live here. I always have." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he should have to. Then Grace stood up. This was the moment the tone shifted. She placed a final document on the table, a certified notice. Not dramatic, not emotional, just official. "This confirms sole ownership remains with Nash Simmons," she said. "No transfer exists, no legal basis for restricting access." Vanessa stared at it, longer this time. Less confident now, more confused. "That can't be right," she whispered. "Bert." Grace answered calmly. "It is," Wade added softly. "It's actually very right." A long silence followed, the kind that forces people to hear their own thoughts too clearly. Vanessa looked at Caleb, then at me, then at the blue folder. For the first time, her voice wasn't sharp. It was uncertain. "So what happens now?" That was the real question. Not legal, human. I leaned back slightly. "I get my house back," I said simply. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had arguments prepared, but none of them worked in a room where facts were already on the table. Grace spoke again. "You can leave voluntarily, or we can escalate this legally." Wade added, "I recommend voluntarily. It's less paperwork." That almost made me smile. Almost. Vanessa looked at Caleb again. This time he didn't look away. That mattered. A lot. Then she did something I didn't expect. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just exhaled, like something inside her had finally run out of energy. "I was trying to fix things," she said quietly. And for the first time all day, I believe she believed that. But belief doesn't replace law, and intention doesn't replace ownership. I nodded slowly. "I understand that. That surprised her, but understanding doesn't change what happened. Silence again. Wade finished his coffee. Grace closed her folder. Caleb stood up slowly. "I'll take Ethan outside," he said. Ethan hesitated, then followed him. And just like that, the hardest part of the room became quieter. Now it was just adults and consequences. Vanessa finally looked at me directly. No anger now, no performance, just exhaustion. "I didn't think it would go this far." I nodded. "That's usually how it goes when people stop checking facts. That wasn't cruelty, just truth." A few minutes passed. No one spoke. Then Grace placed a final instruction on the table. "Keys will need to be returned. Access restored immediately." Vanessa nodded slightly, not gracefully, but finally, "I understand." It was the first time she had said anything close to acceptance. She stood up, slowly. Caleb returned with Ethan, who avoided looking at anyone. The house felt too small suddenly, even though it had always been the same size. Vanessa picked up her purse, paused, looked at me one last time, and said something unexpected. I really thought I was helping. I believed her, but help that ignores truth isn't help. It's damage with good intentions. "I know," I said quietly. That seemed to surprise her again. Then she left. Caleb followed. Ethan paused at the doorway, looked back at me for a second, then left without speaking. And just like that, the house became quiet again. Wade stayed behind. He looked around the kitchen. "Place feels different already," he said. "It shouldn't," I replied. "But it does," he said. I didn't argue, because he was right. I sat back down at the table. The same light, but not the same feeling. Grace gathered her papers. "You handled that well," she said. "I didn't do much," I replied. She smiled slightly. "That's not true. You stayed calm. After she left, it was just Wade and me." He finished his second coffee, then said quietly, "You okay?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. "I got my house back," I said. He nodded, but I looked around the room, at the empty chairs, at the silence, at the absence of people who used to belong here, but not everything else. Wade didn't respond immediately. Then he said something simple. "That part takes longer." I nodded, because he was right again. Outside, the wind moved through the maple trees. The house was mine again, legally, completely, undeniably. But ownership and peace are not the same thing. And as I sat there under Ruth's old light, I realized something I hadn't expected. Winning wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of cleaning up what people leave behind when they think they already own you. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt too quiet. Not peaceful, not calm, quiet in the way a room feels after someone has said something they can't take back. I woke up at 5:58 a.m. out of habit. Ruth used to say, "Old men don't sleep less, they just wake up earlier to think more." She wasn't wrong. I made coffee in the same chipped mug I had used for 15 years. The handle was slightly cracked, but I never replaced it. Some things stay because they're useful. Others stay because they remind you who you used to be. Outside, Knoxville was still half asleep. Maple Hollow Road looked the same as it always had, mailboxes leaning slightly, dogs barking at nothing, the faint smell of wet grass after a light rain. But inside the house, something had shifted permanently, not broken, just changed. Around 7:10 a.m., Caleb texted, "We need time, no apology, no explanation, just distance wrapped in polite words." I didn't reply immediately because sometimes silence is the only honest response. At 8:03 a.m., Ethan called. His voice was small. "Grandpa, can I still come over?" That question hit harder than anything Vanessa had said, because children don't ask legal questions, they ask emotional ones. "Yes," I said immediately. "Of course you can." A pause. "Is everything okay now?" I looked around the kitchen, at the empty chairs, at the table that had held everything the night before. "I think it's getting better," I said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. After the call, I sat on the front porch. The same porch where Ruth once drank coffee every morning at 6:30, no matter the weather. The same porch where I had spent thousands of mornings pretending I understood how life worked. The new lock was still on the door. Black keypad, clean installation, professional. I studied it for a long time. Then I went back inside, got a screwdriver from the garage, and removed it myself. Not out of anger, out of simplicity. I replaced it with the old brass lock, the one that had been there for years. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like restoring something that never should have been touched. By noon, Wade showed up without calling. He leaned against my kitchen counter like he owned the place. "You know," he said, "most people your age spend their time avoiding drama." I took a sip of coffee. "I didn't start it." He nodded. "True. But you finished it like a professional." That made me laugh, a real laugh. The first one in days. Later that afternoon, Grace called. "Everything is settled legally. No complications, no pending claims. You're fully protected." I thanked her. She paused, then added something softer. "You handled that situation with more restraint than most people would have." "I had help," I said. "Good friends, yes, good instincts." "Mostly fear of paperwork," I replied. That made her laugh. But after the call ended, the house felt even quieter, because legal resolution doesn't fix emotional damage. It only defines boundaries around it. 3 days later, Caleb came alone. No Vanessa, no Ethan, just him. He stood on the porch for almost a full minute before knocking. When I opened the door, he looked older, not physically, emotionally, like something had been taken out of him and not replaced yet. "Dad," he said quietly. I stepped aside. "Come in." He didn't sit at first, just stood in the kitchen looking at the table. "I didn't know she was going to change the lock," he said. I nodded. "I believe you." That surprised him. "You do." "I do." A long silence followed. Then he finally sat down. I should have stopped it sooner. "Yes," I said simply. Another pause. I didn't know how. That was the truth of Caleb. Not cruelty, not malice, hesitation. He looked at me. "She really thought she was helping." "I know," I said. "And that's what scares me," he added, "because good intentions can still cause damage if they ignore reality." I leaned back in my chair. Caleb listened to me. He looked up. "This isn't just about a house." He nodded slowly. "I know, but I wasn't sure he fully did. Because the house was just the surface. What lay underneath was trust. And trust doesn't repair as easily as locks do." Later, he asked about Ethan. "He misses you," Caleb said. "I miss him too. He doesn't understand everything." "Good," I said. "He shouldn't have to." Caleb stood to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "Are we okay?" he asked. That question lingered longer than any legal document ever had. I thought carefully before answering. "We're not broken beyond repair," I said. "But we're not where we were either." He nodded. "I understand." And then he left. That evening, Ethan came over like nothing had changed. Kids are good at that. They don't carry legal arguments into dinner. They carry hunger. We ate leftovers on the porch. He talked about school, a science project, a basketball game, normal things, important things, the kind of things that keep life from becoming too heavy. At one point, he looked at the porch chair I had repaired and said, "Grandma would have liked it out here." I smiled. She did. He looked at me. "Mom said people were mad because of paperwork." I sighed quietly. "That's part of it." He nodded slowly, then asked the real question. "Was anyone trying to hurt you?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. "No," I finally said, "not on purpose." He accepted that. Children always accept truth more easily than adults do. They don't add layers to it. They don't decorate it. They just hear it. After he left that night, I sat alone on the porch. The maple trees moved gently in the wind. The house was mine again. But ownership felt different now. Before, it was something I never thought about. After all this, it became something I understood too well. Around 9:30 p.m., Wade called. "How's the palace?" he asked. "Quiet." That's good, right? Depends, I said. Quiet can mean peace, or it can mean absence. He didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "You'll figure it out." I smiled. That's what I keep telling people. After the call, I stayed outside a little longer. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Life continued as it always does. Even after everything changes, here's what I learned through all of it. People don't usually fight over houses. They fight over what houses represent. Security, control, belonging, fear of losing stability. Vanessa wasn't fighting me. She was fighting uncertainty. Caleb wasn't defending anyone. He was avoiding conflict. And Ethan was just trying to understand why adults sometimes turn homes into battlegrounds. The hardest truth, nobody walks away from something like this unchanged. Not even the person who wins. The lock was changed back. The documents were secured. The house was legally protected. But some things never return to what they were, and maybe they're not supposed to. As I sat there in the quiet of Maple Hollow Road, I realized something simple. I didn't just get my house back. I got clarity, and clarity, as it turns out, comes at a cost. One I'm still learning to live with, but I'm learning, slowly, day by day, like everything else that actually matters. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's this. People will often assume control where clarity is missing, not always out of cruelty, but out of fear, impatience, or misunderstanding. And once assumptions replace facts, even families can drift into conflict they never intended. You don't protect your life by reacting louder. You protect it by understanding deeper. And sometimes the quietest people in the room are not confused or powerless. They're simply waiting for everyone else to finish speaking before reality steps in. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one, and as always, thank you for being a part of this.